Hi Adam, this is your video feedback for component 1 of the animation simulation module. As you can see, I've already got your blog opened up. We'll come to that last, I think. So we'll lead with the videos that you submitted here. I've got them all queued up, ready to go. So let's work our way through them and see what we can come up with. I won't put that quite full screen. That'll do probably about there. Okay, so I see from the setup that you've got here, you've certainly got your inverse kinematic system working there. I think there are a few issues, particularly in the weighting of things. I can see there's a lot of kind of rotation going on there, very specific to the wrist, which leads us to this kind of very kind of shallow amount of twist going on here. So it actually looks pretty painful, actually. But yeah, that gradual, or rather that fall off should be gradual, right from the wrist bone all the way up towards the elbow bone. Remember, you've got the radius and ulnar bones, which should go in there, or rather would go in there in a real person, which is why we looked at having like a twist bone idea in there, which I don't seem to see in there. There may be one, maybe it's just not set up in there for the bone structure we can see unhidden at the moment, but that's kind of not working for me, this bit. So let's continue. Yeah, one thing that I did notice when I was looking at your basic layout here is that I'm not sure how usable the actual rig is. I mean, something like this is huge. It's an enormous, great bit of text there. That entire piece of text there should probably be about as long as, one of the fingers, maybe 1.5 times the length of the finger, and should really be anchored towards the edge here, maybe anchored to this point, or maybe the wrist bone or something, so it travels with that. But that's way too big. I'm playing that through now. I'm not quite sure what's actually happening here. I'm guessing that at this point you just flipped over to forward kinematics, which again, so the kinematic structure functions, which is good. I think some of the weight painting needs some work though. There's a big recess sort of there. I think there was one towards the elbow is actually pretty good, back of the elbow. Yeah, but your controllers in there. And I like some of the things that you decided to do with the rig. It does seem to me like you attempted to push it beyond the basic setup that I did, which is good. Let's just see what this one does. So I'm guessing that this is moving the hip. Sort of control for the hip. I mean, if so, then traditionally that controller would be around the hip area, not towards the feet. But maybe it's not that. Maybe it's not supposed to be there. You've certainly got, you've got a reasonable range of movement in your character. I think you need to be careful with some of the rigging in particular places, though. For example, when we do see the head move, I think you're perhaps selecting the wrong bone there. You can see as the head's kind of nodding, it's pulling the neck out at the back, dropping the chin down, popping the neck out at the back. So I think a couple of things I would recommend there. One is visual reference. Look where the actual pivot point of the skull is, where it attaches to the spine. The other thing is just consider where, based on that visual reference, where the bone structure should go through the head, because there shouldn't just be one solid bone, then a kind of an end affecting point on here. In the structure I put together, there was a series of bones that went up towards the head that then broke off down towards the jaw, and having that split about where the jaw was did permit head movement around the top of where you'd expect the skull to attach to your spine. You appear just to have a single bone which goes right from the kind of the base of the neck where the clavicle bones connect all the way to the tip of the head, which is going to mean that any rotation along that length is going to be difficult to maintain any, let's say, real reference to actual human movement. So again, something you could have looked at, and I think the visual reference probably will tell us the same. I don't think there probably is enough of that kind of stuff. Now, another thing I noticed with this, because I think we get towards the end of the clip now, is that in your sequence, I don't see any of the kind of extra features that I suggested you might want to put in there. So things like, clenched fists, individual finger controllers, elements like foot rolls. And I think there was something in there when we see the overall character moved up and down and so on. I think there was something for the for the foot. If I just zip it on a little bit. And maybe we've gone a little bit too far. I'll just nip back. There's certainly something moving around the feet, but I'd like to see a better demonstration of the character setup that you've put together there, because I think you've probably done a lot more work in there than you showcased in this individual video sequence. I mean, really, we've only got like a 2-minute sequence, which is attempting to demonstrate your entire figurative rig. You know, really what you should be doing is demonstrating each individual aspect of it. Any bits of work that you put into this to make it work, you should be demonstrating them. With things like your pole vector elements for the elbows, demonstrating that they function. If you did have controllers for the fingers, show them individually. You know, if you have got individual kind of foot roll, foot bank controls, show those individually. So all in all, as a figurative rig, it certainly functions, but there are quite a few deficiencies with it, particularly in the weight painting. I think there's some issues in the way the IK and the FK is working effectively. But anyway, we'll leave it there for now. We'll move on to the facial material. So I'll just pop back out of here, and then we'll move on. In fact, we won't go to the facial stuff. Let's have a look at your demonstrations of the animation. So again, so remember, you're not being marked on the animation here. You're being marked on the quality of how the mesh performs. I'll just zip it back. We'll go full screen. Let's put up. Good that you have an element of breathing going on in there. That's quite an interesting setup you've got there. I mean, everything seems to be behaving pretty well there. I mean, I still think there's some issues around the neck movement. This looks like that's gone way beyond its natural limits. Again, there's an issue here with the weight painting. That could have been tidied up. Wouldn't have been too tricky a fix, I don't think. Okay, let's move to the next one then. Generally speaking, you know, the character works reasonably well, but there are some issues, I think, around some of the bends, particularly of the legs. There starts to be like a little kink there going on. A few little snaps going on, which I'm guessing could be to do with the pole vector constraint for the knees. Again, I'm looking at the constraint on those knees because it's definitely a harsh angle there. Now, and that's something that you could have corrected using a blend shape, something that was in the tutorial video. So you could have done what I call a corrected blend shape, just to tidy those bits up. So when it bends, maybe the back just fattens up or plumps up a bit to have the thigh meet sort of the calf. That would have been a correction you could have done. I think also within that, it looks to me like there's a few kind of unnatural finger movements in there. Okay, right. Final thing on the figurative stuff is it would have been useful, I think, it's a necessity really, pretty vital to showcasing your work effectively. It would have been useful certainly to have put together like a range of motion animation, just to show every the flex of the foot, of the toes, right the way up towards the knees, the thighs, up the torso, body twists and so on, arm extensions, right the way up to the down to the fingertips, finger clenches and so on, and then right the way up through the neck to the tip of the head. That really would have showcased this better, I think. But that said, your animations are in there. They show that it functions pretty well. So let's now move on to the facial stuff. Okay, so you certainly got a lot of stuff going on there with the facial stuff. A whole series of different sliders. Let's just see what this one is. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's good to see like a final render of this kind of thing. The only thing I would say is that if you're going to render something out, sort the lighting out, will you? Because I cannot see any sort of detail around some of these areas of just how well this face is deforming. So look to tweaking the lighting if you're going to submit something like this. At least have shadows on. There's very little ambient occlusion on there. Okay, so let me just go back to the facial stuff. Now again, similar to the figurative stuff, for this material here, what you really should be doing is not just demonstrating all that you've animated all these and they do things. He's given me a proper blow-by-blow account of what every single individual slider does. I stressed this in the tutorials. I discussed it with you. I'm certain it says it in the assignment. It says it in the supporting document. So you should be going through every single slider, pushing it up and down, showing exactly what each one does. Because from this, I don't know if there's individual sliders for individual eye blinks, or it's one slider that does both. There's no labelling of any of your sliders here, so again, there's no clues there either. I know this is going to be the eyes, but beyond that, I don't know any of these other things do. All I see is a final animation of just things moving around, so I've got to have the best guess of that. Now, what is going on in there is pretty good, actually. It works reasonably well. But that said, I would like to have seen much more visual reference used here. For an example of that would be when we see the mouth open. I'll just let this do this. That's not the shape of a mouth when it opens. It should be much more of an oval type shape, certainly not this very square type shape. Okay, so the bottom of the mouth should kind of join in the corner it does there, then it should kind of gradually transition round into the top. You've got this very square looking thing going on. I mean, some of the facial expressions are pretty good, but I think again just more visual reference needs to be done here. The other thing I would say about this is looking at the eyes. I think the eyes are moving beyond their natural limits at times. This eye controller does not need to move very far to get those eyes to look into the corners. You can see there's points here where that eye is almost lost. The pupil of the eye is almost gone. The iris is gone. Similarly when it looked up. So again, just control your animation to better showcase what you can do. I mean, you could have put some sort of limitations on this, see how far it can possibly move. Anyway, so let's move on to the next bit, which is your visual reference material. So we'll stop that there, I'll minimize it, and then we'll bring this to the front. Okay, so within this, I'm pleased that you've gone through and discussed some of your iterative development. There's some good annotation in there. It's not purely just here's a series of images and renders that I did, but there's some good discussion of things. But again, another sticking point is that I don't really see any visual reference evidence in here. I mean, you kind of allude to it, you talk about aligning to certain bits of visual reference or consideration for, but there's nothing in there which I can see relates specifically to showing visual reference to, for example, joint rotational limits, which in your assignment in the guidance document you are asked to do specifically, to look for joint rotational limits. If I pop up onto screen, this is the accompanying document for your assignment, so additional guidance document. Okay, so the portfolio will include review of realistic anatomy to inform bone positioning and natural skin deformation. As far as I can tell, there's no examples of you looking at visual reference, looking at people moving, walking, articulating fingers, facial expressions, for example. So, justification for choice of joint rotation limits. There's some kind of suggestion towards that, but there's no evidence of visual reference for that. And how do you know what the rotation limits are? Even if you'd just taken a video clip of your own hand, for example, flexing the fingers, that would have been something. Right, discussion of efficient control systems and functionality required by an animator. I don't see anywhere in here where it says what an animator would desire. There's some discussion of, again, kind of alluding to certain things, what would be useful and so on, but there's very little in there which relates to the work of other people, real world examples of faces moving, for example, facial expressions, the kind of facial expressions. So what there is good in terms of being iterative development and reflective journal of what you've done, but it's just not entirely what we asked for. Okay, so all in all, I think it's a good submission. I don't think it's certainly not in the excellent section, but it is a good submission. Okay, so take that on board, and I'll catch you later.